안녕하세요. 오늘 사회자 마르타 알리나입니다. 저는 서울 스타트업스의 CEO를 맡고 있습니다. 오늘은 행사 인천 스타트업학회 글로벌 컨퍼런스의 일환으로 마련된 만큼 향후 내용을 가급적으로 영어로 진행하도록 하겠습니다. Hello, my name is Martha and I'm the hustler behind Seoul Startups, Korea's biggest international startup community. I would like to invite you to listen to three fabulous speakers who will be discussing insights and experiences from remote tech and digital transformation as part of the post-pandemic initiative webinar series powered by Seedstars and Shinhan Group's innovation growth platform. The aim of this series is to ensure a continuous education when it comes to technology, innovation, ecosystem building, as well as ensure that we create a sustainable and strong startup hub here in Korea and in Asia. Shinhan Financial Group is the biggest financial service provider here in Korea and has long since been supporting the growth and development of the Korean startup ecosystem, helping connect it with the wider global startup scene. This October, it will be launching its very exciting initiative called Incheon Startup Park as part of an international network for entrepreneurs and startup ecosystem stakeholders. Seedstars is a Swiss-based group with the mission to impact people's lives in emerging markets through technology and entrepreneurship, with a particular focus on the Sustainable Development Goals of the UN. Seedstars connects stakeholders, builds companies from scratch with public and private partners, and invests in high-growth startups within these ecosystems. Seedstars aims to foster impact investing and impact entrepreneurship all over the world through different activities that range from startup scouting, events organization, to company building and acceleration programs. Seedstars has built the world's biggest community of changemakers in emerging markets. I would like to introduce our first speaker. Duon Cha is the CEO and founder of Cha Mobility Research Institute, which focuses its work on mobility strategy and services in Korea. Having been a researcher at Japan Automobile Research Institute and Korea Institute of Industrial Technology, he led, as a director, the human interface team at Hyundai Mobis Research Center. He is an acknowledged author of fascinating books like The Future of Mobility and Job Killer, The Future of Jobs, where he discusses the future of technology as well as our society. Currently, he's working as a consultant, writer, analyst for mobility and human-machine interface designs. Duon, would you like to start off your presentation?
네, 저는 오늘 타이틀을 모빌리티 트랜스포메이션이라고 가지고 왔습니다. 디지털 트랜스포메이션이 굉장히 글로벌리 화두가 되고 있고, 한국에서도 최근 뉴딜 정책 가운데 하나로 디지털 트랜스포메이션이 얘기가 되고 있는데요. 실제로 한국에서 굉장히 많은 모빌리티 관련 기업들도 새로운 비즈니스 모델을 찾고 있고요. 기존에 이제 모빌리티 섹터가 아니었던 기업들도 모빌리티 쪽의 비즈니스와 개발을 하기 위해서 굉장히 많은 노력을 하고 있어요. 그러니까 하나의 새로운 이머징 마켓으로 한국뿐만 아니라 글로벌리 떠오르는 마켓인데, 그 부분에 대해서 특히 이제 코비드-19 이후에 어떤 변화가 시작이 됐는지에서 말씀을 드리겠습니다. 첫 번째 챕터인데요. 사실은 자동차 산업부터 말씀을 드리면, 자동차 산업의 상태가 좋았던 건 아닙니다. 이미 이제 피크카라 그래가지고 2000년에 글로벌 시장이 한 9천만 대가 깨지는 그런 이제 예측이 되어가지고 자동차 시장이 굉장히 조금 긴장한 상태였고요. 그 다음에 이제 코비드가 오면서 자동차 시장 굉장히 좀 어려운, 카클립이라고 저는 표현을 하는데 그 부분이 맞는지는 모르겠습니다만 더 어려운 상태로 진화하고 있죠. 그 코로나19 이전에, 코비드-19 이전에 이제 어렸던 상황 같은 경우에 첫 번째는 자동차 가격이 올라갔다는 겁니다. 환경 규제가 굉장히 이제 많은 나라에서, 물론 한국에서도 2035년부터는 서울이 친환경차만 등록을 할 수 있게 되고 굉장히 많은 비용, 자율주행이라든가 이제 전기차 개발 R&D에 굉장히 많은 비용이 투입이 됐고요. 그 다음에 이제 그런 기능들이 점차 부과가 되면서 차의 가격이 올라가기 시작을 했고, 이제 사람들이 차를 유지하는 기간이 굉장히 길어집니다. 하드웨어나 소프트웨어나 예전보다 더 오랜 시간을 사용할 수 있고요. 그 다음에 또 하나의 이슈는 뭐냐면은 카쉐어링, 라이드 쉐어링이 굉장히 활성화가 됐습니다. 이게 굳이 차를 공유하느냐 소유하느냐 문제가 아니라 하나의 차량을 사용할 수 있는 모드를 선택할 수 있게 된 거죠. 그리고 또 하나, 우리 이스쿠터, 일렉트릭 스쿠터 같은 경우 퍼스널 모빌리티가 굉장히 많이 한국에도 지금 퍼져 있어요. 한 서울에 17,000대 정도가 지금 운영이 되고 있는 걸로 파악이 되고 있는데, 그러면서 이 마이크로 모빌리티, 퍼스널 모빌리티들이 택시라든가 아니면은 개인의 굉장히 단거리 이동, 1에서 한 5km 정도 이동을 대체하기 시작했습니다. 그러면서 소비자들은 갈등을 하죠. 내가 언제쯤 차를 사야 될지, 그러니까 웨이트 앤 시 애티튜드를 가지게 됩니다. 그러면서 카마게돈이라고 저희가 부르는데, 그 자동차가 안 팔리는 주요 원인으로 지금 제가 말씀드린 부분들이 커다란 임팩을 줬죠. 그리고 또 하나, 많은 기업들이 글로벌 카메이커라든가 한국 현대자동차들을 포함을 해서 2020에서 2021년에 자율주행의 커머셜라이제이션을 얘기를 했는데, 이게 다 딜레이가 됩니다. 자율주행의 커머셜라이제이션이 대부분의 업체들이 얘기하는 게 사실은 지오펜스라 그러죠. 이렇게 갇혀진 그런 에어리어에서 그 자율주행차 운행되는 걸 얘기를 하는데, 그게 이제 기술적인 문제, 금전적인 문제 때문에 굉장히 어려워져요. 예를 들면 첫 번째, 금전적인 R&D 비용을 얘기를 들면 160억 달러 정도가 2019년까지 주요 30개 업체에서 투자를 했는데, 그 50%는 이제 구글의 웨이모라든가 GM의 크루즈 오토메이션, 우버가 투자를 한 거고요. 그 다음에 나머지 50%도 바이두라든가 도요타라든가 포드의 알고, AI, 애플에서 투자를 한 거거든요. 즉, 돈을 가진 기업만 이제는 자율주행을 개발할 수 있는 시대가 됐다는 겁니다. 기존의 과거에는 풀스택 업체들이, 스타트업들이 자율주행을 할 수 있었지만, 기술력을 가진 스타트업들은 이미 대기업에 거의 다 매각이 된, M&A가 된 상태가 돼버렸고요. 그 다음에 두 번째 자율주행이 좀 어려운 이유 같은 경우에는 인공지능의 실망입니다. 그래프에서 보시면은 실제로 L2, 그 다음에 L1, 죄송합니다. L2, L3 같은 경우가 이제 인간과 인공지능이 능력이 동등하거나 인공지능이 뛰어난 상황을 얘기를 하는데, 실제로는 L1이라는 거죠. 인공지능이 아직까지도 사람의 능력을 못 쫓아가고 있습니다. 인공지능이 사람의 능력의 99.9999%까지는 쫓아가야 자율주행이 어느 정도 이제 도로에 나올 수 있는데, 아직까지는 좀 어렵다는 부분이죠. 그러면서 이제 코비드가 터졌습니다. 코비드19가 터졌는데, 실제로 그 데이터들을 조사를 해보면 딜리버리 쪽이 사실은 굉장히 많은 수혜를 받았고요. 그 다음에 이제 자전거, 좀 쉐어링 자전거도 마찬가지죠. 그 다음에 이제 지역에 따라 차이가 있지만, 유럽이나 미국에서는 이스쿠터 같은 경우에는 금지를 했습니다. 왜냐하면 코비드19 바이러스가 전동 킥보드를 구성하는 그 플라스틱하고 쇠에 3일 동안 이제 살아있다는 논문이 발표가 되면서 그런 상황이었는데, 한국 같은 경우에는 그런 상황에 대해서 금지를 시키지 않았고, 실제로 제가 밝힐 수는 없지만 모 기업들의 데이터를 보면 전동 스쿠터 사용량이 굉장히 올라갔어요. 글로벌에서 굉장히 놀라웠던 수준이죠. 그 다음에 이제 개인의 자전거라든가 그 다음에 이제 카쉐어링은 단기를 얘기를 하는 게 아니라 한 달 이상의 카쉐어링 같은 경우에는 사람들이 차를 살까 말까 고민을 하면서 한 달 단위로 빌리다 보니까 굉장히 늘어났죠. 그게 택시 시장을 한동안 대체를 했습니다. 렌탈 시장도 마찬가지죠. 대신 이제 뭐 신차라든가 이제 항공이라든가 그 퍼블릭 트랜시라든가 아니면 택시 같은 경우는 굉장히 어려움을 겪었죠. 그러면서 이제 모빌리티 시장의 대변혁이 시작이 되고요. 코비드19가 터지면서 사실은 자율주행이라든가 모빌리티 시장이 지금 말씀드린 것처럼 좀 양분화됐는데 가장 놀라웠던 게 사실 아마존입니다. 아마존이 죽스라는 업체를 인수를 했죠. 샌프란시스코 베이스의 그 풀스택 자율주행 스타트업인데 기존에 한 32빌리언까지 기업 가치가 올라갔었는데 12빌리언에 인수를 했어요. 거의 헐값에 인수를 했고, 아마존이 사람이 나르는 죽수, 사람을 자율주행으로 사람을 태우는 죽수를 인수를 하면서 과연 무엇을 할 것인가 앞으로 굉장히 관심을 받았죠. 임바크라는 자율주행 트럭 업체라는 데랑 일도 했고, 오로라 이노베이션이라는 그 이제 구글의 자율주행을 총괄하는 크리스 엄슨이 세운 자율주행 업체랑도 일을 했고요. 그 다음에 이제 요번에 CES 2020에 갔을 때 제가 제일 관심 있게 인터뷰를 했던 게 위라이드라는 중국 업체인데요. 그 아마존의 AWS에서 자율주행을 제어를 하고 있고 굉장히 긴밀하게 협력을 하고 있더라고요. 그리고 리비안이라는 전기차 업체의 그 10만 대 계약을 했고 투자도 했고요. 그 다음에 디스패치라는 업체를 2017년도에 인수를 해서 우리 꼬마 딜리버리 로봇을 운영하고 있어가지고, 아마존이 과연 사람을 자율주행으로 운송을 할 것인지 아니면은 비대면 그 컨택트리스하게 물류 쪽에 먼저 투입을 할 것인지가 사실은 이제 모빌리티 업계에 굉장히 커다란 관심으로 떠올랐고, 아마존의 꿈은 무엇일까라는 게 지금 많은 분들의 궁금한 점입니다. 그리고 이제 아마존뿐만 아니라 그 구글의 웨이모 같은 경우도 이제 물류 쪽에 진출을 하기 시작을 합니다. 올해 3월, 5월에 이제 마지막은 이제 투자 시리즈가 5월에 종료가 됐는데 물류 쪽을 시작을 하는 것을 발표를 했습니다. 웨이모 비아라는 그 클래스 A 트럭으로 물류를 고속도로의 물류를 담당을 하고, 퍼시피카를 가지고 도심의 물류를 담당을 하겠다는 거죠. 그러면서 이제 그 거대 기업들이 물류 쪽에 뛰어들면서 실제로 이제 우리가 공장에서 가정까지 어떤 물건을 딜리버리를 받을 때 기존의 이제 사람, 휴먼 드라이버의 역할들을 로봇, 자율주행으로 대체를 하겠다는 전략들이 점점 가시화되고 있습니다. 그러면서 우리가 이제 관심을 갖게 된 게 퍼포스 빌트 비클이라고 하는데요. 첫 번째 그럼 뉴로의 R2라는 미국의 스타트업이 개발한 레벨 4 자율주행 차입니다. 보시면 아시겠지만 편의점이죠. 저희가 그 스마트폰으로 주문을 하면 이 차가 자율주행으로 일반 공공도로를 달릴 수 있게 미국에서 그 DOT에서 허락을 받았어요. 그래갖고 우리 집 앞에 오면 왔다는 문자를 보내면 우리가 이제 받은 코드를 입력을 하고 제가 주문한 걸 꺼내는 그런 상황입니다. 그리고 네오릭스라는 업체도 굉장히 관심을 받고 있는데요. 중국에서 코비드19가 터졌을 때 사람이 아니라 저 시스템이 방제 역할을 하는 거죠. 지금 첫 번째 사진에 보시면 옆에 그 수증기 같은 게 보이는데 저게 이제 방제를 위한 역할을 하는 거고요. 오른쪽 같은 경우에는 그 환자들이라든가 의료시설에 음식물이라든가 아니면 의료 용품들을 이제 나르는, 무인으로 나르는 거죠. 그러면서 이제 컨택트리스를 그 이제 실현을 하는 저런 이제 자율주행이라든가 모빌리티 시스템들이 지금 굉장히 많은 관심을 받고 있고요. GM, 혼다, 크루즈도 이제 올진이라는 그 이런 시스템을 내놨는데 이들의 공통점이 뭐냐면 슬라이드 혹은 스케이트보드라고 부르는 제일 마지막에 있는 배터리와 그 다음에 바퀴와 그 다음에 제어 장치들이 있는 그 스케이트보드에 무엇을 얹을 것인가. 예를 들면 첫 번째 그림처럼 물류를 위한 그 캐빈 파트를 얹으면 물류차가 되고요. 그 다음에 두 번째처럼 사람이 타는 캐빈을 얹으면 사람이 타는 그런 이제 차로 변신을 한다는 거죠. 이런 것들이 일어나면서 이제 그 슬라이드의 개념들, 이런 것들이 실제로 이제 그 상용화가 되고 있는데, 이런 것들이 라스트 마일에도 적용이 되고 있습니다. 물류 체계, 라스트 마일이라 그러면 실제로 그 물류라든가 아니면은 우리가 어떤 모빌리티 디바이스를 탔을 때 마지막에 내려서 집이나 목적지까지 갔을 때를 우리가 라스트 마일이라고 얘기를 하는데요. 예전에 물류 시스템 같은 경우에는 우리가 이제 차를 가지고 마트 같은 데 갔죠. 그런데 지금 같은 경우에는 오토바이라든가 아니면 소형 로봇이라든가 실제로 배송을 하고요. 마지막에 스토어 헤일링 같은 경우에는 좀 전에 알트처럼 보여드렸던 편의점 형태의 움직이는 무빙 스페이스가 집까지 데려다 준다는 거죠. 그 다음에 코비드19 임팩트라 그러니까 WF 데이터인데요. 2024년까지 약 78%의 시장 성장을 보여준다는 거죠. 그럼 왜 이런 곳에 이제 라스트 마일 딜리버리 로봇들이 등장했느냐라고 했을 때 기존에도 이제 굉장히 많은 기업들이 트라이를 하고 있었습니다. 근데 첫 번째 같은 경우에는 이것들을 사용하는 이유가 뭐냐면 로스가 많다는 거죠. 그 배송이 잘못돼 가지고 다시 수거해가지고 다시 데려다주는, 다시 이제 배송하는 것들이 많았고, 그 다음에 이제 코스트가, 인간 코스트가 휴먼 드라이버의 인간 코스트가 되게 비쌌습니다. 미국의 데이터인데 이제 1.6달러 정도였는데 로봇을 쓰면 이제 0.06달러까지 이제 다운시킬 수 있다는 거고, 최근 우리나라 한국 같은 경우에는 라이더들을 구하기 되게 힘들어가지고 배송 한 건에 2만 원까지 올라가고 있거든요. 그러다 보니까 실제로 내가 주문하는 것보다 배송비가 더 나가는 그런 상황이고 사람이 모자르기 때문에 코비드19가 이런 라스트 마일 그 로봇의 등장을 굉장히 가속화시키고 있죠. 이 데이터에는 이제 라스트 마일 코스트 스트럭처를 보여주는데 라스트 마일 딜리버리 비용이 전체 물류 비용에는 53%를 차지하기 때문에 이제 라스트 마일이 굉장히 좀 중요해지고 있다라는 부분이고, 그럼 이제 어떤 로봇들이 있느냐? 한 10kg대가 있고요. 그 다음에 이제 아까 보여드렸던 유로의 알투처럼 한 50kg 정도를 실을 수 있는 로봇들이 있고요. 그 다음에 이제 자율주행차에 지금 굉장히 중요한 역할을 하는 라이다 센서가 있는 게 있고 없는 게 있고요. 바퀴 3개짜리, 4개짜리, 6개짜리가 있고요. 배송에 따라서는 뭐 푸드라든가 비버리지라든가 이제 리테일이 있고요. 그 다음에 우리 인도로 다니는 조그만 로봇들이 있는 반면에 도로를 다니는 이제 50km 이상의 이제 로봇들이 등장을 하고 있습니다. 그리고 이제 스펙에 따라서는 낮에만 운영이 가능한 거, 아니면은 낮과 밤이 다 운영이 가능한 거, 그 다음에 비가 오는 날이라든가 스톰인 상황에서 운영되는 거 등등 있어가지고 이런 것들이 이제 앞으로 관심을 더욱 받지 않을까라는 말씀을 드리고 발표를 마치겠습니다.
박사님 진짜 재미있는 발표예요. 진심으로 감사합니다.
감사합니다.
저 아직 그 전 세계 모빌리티 트렌드에 대한 그림을 되게 재미있게 설명해 주시고
네.
되게 우리 시청자들한테 되게 재미있는 정보를 나누어 주셔서 진짜 감사합니다. 저희 질문이 몇 가지 있는데요. 그 여기 발표하셨을 때는 좀 더 전 세계 트렌드에 대해 설명하셨는데
네.
저는 좀 한국 시장에 한국 경우에는 그 모빌리티 모델가 다른 나라에 비교하면 어떻게 다른지 좀 궁금합니다.
굉장히 중요한 질문이에요. 제가 한국 쪽 내용을 좀 누락을 했는데, 실제 한국 같은 경우에는 지금 모빌리티 시장이 굉장히 좀 복잡하고, 그 다음에 약간 솔직히 말씀드리면 해외보다는 좀 떨어지는 측면이 있습니다.
그래요?
네, 지금 딜리버리 쪽만 좀 말씀을 드리면, 제가 말씀드린 게 크게 두 가지 카테고리거든요. 50km 이상의 도로를 달릴 수 있는 굉장히 커다란 용량의 로봇들이 있고, 그 다음에 국내에서 이제 조금 다니고 있지만 한 1에서 10km 다니는 그런 로봇들이 있거든요. 근데 이제 첫 번째 문제는 그 스타트업 관점에서 가장 중요한 게 규제입니다. 제가 이제 국무조정실의 신산업규제혁신위원회 신서비스 분과장을 맡고 있는데, 몇 년 전에 이제 그 로봇 딜리버리 하시는 분들이 오셨어요. 와가지고 우리 자장면이나 피자나
맞아요.
커피 같은 것들을
기억이 나요.
예, 그쵸.
특히 자장면 로봇이.
예, 저는 이제 꼬마 로봇이라고 부르는데, 그들을 가지고 딜리버리를 했을 때 퀘스천이 뭐였냐면 어디로 달려야 되느냐. 인도, 차도, 자전거 전용도로, 이게 룰이 없었어요. 룰이 없어가지고 제가 위원장이니까 이제 담당 공무원을 놓고 그 다음에 이제 업체분들하고 얘기를 하는데 답이 안 나왔습니다. 원래 이제 네거티브라 그래가지고 규제 자체가 없으면 아무데나 달릴 수 있는 게 이제 미국의 유럽의 규제 원칙인데 그때 이제 한참 이제 논의를 하다가 일단은 좀 연구를 해보고 얘기를 하자라고 얘기를 하고 연구 영역으로 리서치를 추진을 했었는데 한국에 이제 규제 샌드박스라는 게 있습니다. 영국에서 사실은 이제 운영이 되는 어떤 규제 프리존이라고 얘기를 하죠. 그쪽에 이제 지금 아까 말씀드린 업체들이 등록을 해가지고 위원회에서 오케이를 해가지고 달리고 있는 게 인도로 달리고 있습니다. 인도로 달리고 있는데 단 조건이 있어요. 옆에 사람이 있어야 돼요.
그러면은
인건비가 더 나갈 수 있습니다.
그러니까요.
네네. 근데 이제 안전 문제도 아직까지는 있고요. 그 다음에 뭐가 있냐면 굉장히 그 주변의 사람들이 낯설어 하기도 합니다. 저게 뭐야? 라고 얘기를 하기도 하고 대부분의 그런 소형 딜리버리 로봇들은 이 깃발들을 높이 하나 만들어 놨거든요. 안 보여요. 큰 대형 차량들 같은 게 안 보이기 때문에 그걸 또 이제 달아갖고 달리고 있고 그 다음에 이제 어린아이들이 굉장히 좀 귀여웠다거나 진로를 방해한다거나 이런 부분이 있고 해외에서도 좀 비슷한 게 뭐냐면 이렇게 좀 연출된지는 모르겠는데 그 크기가 크지도 않고 그러다 보니까 막 걷어찬다든가 파손한다든가 이제 그런 부분이 있어가지고 아직까지는 사회적인 수용성이 어느 나라나 높지는 않습니다.
없어요.
그러니까 새로운 기술에 대해서는 사용자의 그 주변 사람들의 수용도가 높아야 되는데 이제 그 부분이 낮고 한국은 아직까지는 초기 단계입니다. 아까 말씀드린 50kg대 제품들은 없어요. 그리고 이제 꼬마 로봇이라고 저는 부르는 로봇들은 지금 몇 군데 대학이라든가 주변에서 이제 규제 샌드박스를 통해서 운영은 되고 있습니다.
그렇군요. 되게 재미있는 것 같은데요. 왜냐면 한국에서 한편으로 되게 기술적으로 특히 그 우리 뭐 쿠팡하고 마켓 컬리
맞아요.
되게 이미 전 세계에서 유명한 업체들이
그렇죠.
그 뭐 배달 관련 업체들이 있는데 그거
네.
추가적으로 뭐 현대자동차, 모비스터 그쪽으로 많이 지금 투자하고 있는지 알고 있지만 아직도 시장이 뭐 여러 가지 이유로 아직 준비 안 되는 것 같은데요.
그렇죠. 그러니까는 새로운 기술이 나와도 시장을 형성하는데 굉장히 많은 스타트업들이 시간이 걸리고 비용이 걸리는 게 아직까지는 한국에서는 조금 아쉬운 현실입니다.
저 사실은 마지막 질문이 있는데요. 우리 시청자들 중에서 되게 한국 시장 진출에 관심이 있는 창업자도 있잖아요.
그렇죠.
그분들한테 여기 특히 모빌리티 관련 기회가 있는지 기회가 있으면 어떤 전략, 어떤 방향을 추천하신지 좀 알려주시면 감사하겠습니다.
저에게도 가끔 이제 외국 뭐 대사관들을 통해서 이제 외국 스타트업들이 문의가 와요. 가장 많은 문의가 오는 그 비즈니스 섹터가 어디냐면 전동 킥보드입니다. 이스쿠터. 미국이라든가 유럽의 그 버드하고 라임이 굉장히 도시 쪽하고 부딪혔던 거와는 다르게 한국은 굉장히 조용히 안착을 했고요. 특히 이제 그 관련 어떤 레귤레이션이 세팅이 돼가지고 뭐 올해 12월부터는 뭐 자전거 전용 도로를 다룰 수 있고 파킹은 어떻게 하는지 룰이 다 정해졌어요. 예, 다른 게 뭐냐면 미국이나 유럽처럼 파손율이 굉장히 낮아요. 그러니까 미국 같은 경우에는 특히 이제 버드라임 을 가지고 굉장히 뭐 누가 파손을 잘했나 정도면 인스타그램을 찍고 굉장히 난리가 쳤었는데 한국은 거의 파손이 없어요. 그러다 보니까 운영 비용이 굉장히 적게 듭니다. 그래서 지금 라임이 굉장히 많이 들어오고 있고 빔도 들어와 있고 그쵸, 해외 업체들이 들어오고 있어가지고 그런 쪽에 대한 어떤 외국 업체들의 좀 진단이 있고요. 그 다음에 또 두 번째가 뭐냐면은 카풀이나 카셔링에 대한 알고리즘을 이렇게 좀 한국 시장에 적용할 수 있지 않느냐는 그런 타진들이 또 많이 옵니다. 왜냐하면은 우리가 뭐 카시어링 하면은 차만 움직이는 게 아니고 알고리즘 자체의 최적화 옵티마이제이션이 굉장히 중요하잖아요. 이제 그런 부분에 대해서 이제 소프트웨어 쪽에서 인공지능 쪽에 들어오고 싶다는 부분이 많아가지고 한국의 어떤 그 서비스 자체는 좀 제한은 있지만 실제 그 백본을 이루는 소프트웨어라든가 이제 인공지능에 대한 수요는 굉장히 많거든요. 그런 부분은 충분히 해외 스타트업들 같은 경우에도 진출이 가능하다고 판단됩니다.
원칙도 그 분야에서 원칙이 그 카풀링과 달리 좀 더 덜 심하고
그렇죠.
진출 어려움이 좀 덜 심할 것 같은데요.
그렇죠. 그리고 또 이미 자율주행 조금 이제 범위를 넓히자면 자율주행 쪽엔 해외 업체들이 들어와 있습니다. 그러니까 그 자율주행 셔틀 쪽에는 그 프랑스의 나부야라는 업체도 들어와 있고요. 뉴질랜드에 이제 오미오라는 업체들도 들어와 있고 그 셔틀 사용에 대한 굳이 뭐 한국에서 한국 제품만을 오퍼레이션 하겠다 그런 게 없어요. 예. 그래가지고 어떻게 보면 시장은 작지만 기회는 나쁘지 않은, 특히 이제 서울 같은 경우는 뭐 글로벌에서 이제 메트로폴리탄 중에 하나잖아요. 그래서 굉장히 좋은 레퍼런스 사이트가 될 수 있습니다.
저는 그런 얘기 들었어요. 저 작년에 그 라임 C에서
네.
그 만났고 잠깐 얘기했어요. 그때 그 한국 시장 진출하기 전에
네.
그분이 왜 아시아 시장 중에서 왜 먼저 한국에 들어왔는지 그 이유가
네.
한국이 되게 런치패드 같은 역할이 있는데요.
그렇죠.
되게 작은 시장이 있지만 전자 제품 사용의 노하우 되게 높이고
그렇죠.
그 사용자들한테 바로 교육을 시킬 필요가 없고
맞습니다.
그냥 제품을 보여주고 바로 어떻게 하면 되는지 바로 알 수 있겠다고 하는데요.
그렇죠.
그래서 테스팅 베드로 되게 좋은 데라고
네,
하는데 그 때문에 라임이 먼저 한국에서 진출했다고요. 다음에 뭐 지금 코로나 때문에 그 다음에 어떻게 할지 모르겠지만 일단은 한국에서 되게 잘 되고 있는 것 같은데
지금 오퍼레이션 잘 되고 있어요.
네.
코비드19로 자전거하고 킥보드를 대중교통 대신 권장하는 그 상황이 지금 유럽 쪽에서 계속 벌어지고 있거든요. 뭐 영국이라든가 독일이라든가 뉴질랜드라든가 그다음에 그 미국 뉴욕 스테이트 이쪽에서는 그 대중교통의 이제 소셜 디스턴스를 다 지키려면 대중교통을 전체를 오퍼레이션을 해도 기존의 인원의 10%밖에는 수용을 못해요. 그러다 보니까 이제 그 우리 퍼스널 모빌리티를 하고 있고 그들의 안전을 위해서 이제 자전거 저정도를 폭을 확대하는
맞아요.
작업을 지금 굉장히 많이 시작을 하고 있어가지고, 그리고 또 안전을 위해서 이 피지컬 배리어를 또 이제 차도하고 구분을 하고 있어가지고 이 모빌리티 산업이 코비드19가 어쨌든 그 모빌리티 산업뿐만 아니라 이동 공간의 재설계까지 시작이 돼가지고 아마 좀 변화가 클 것 같습니다. 네.
기대하고 있습니다. 네.
빨리 코비드19 끝나야죠.
제발 빨리 코비드 끝나면 좋을 텐데요. 알겠습니다, 박사님. 오늘은 시간을 주셔서 진짜 진심으로 감사드리고
감사합니다.
스튜디오에서 촬영 부분을 여기까지 마무리하겠습니다. Thank you for listening to this presentation. We will continue with the rest of our speakers, so stay tuned for more.
Prashant Sharma is the head of growth for the San Francisco-based online education company Springboard. He has been instrumental in setting up the India business and scaled it from zero to several $1 million in IRR over the last couple of years. In his previous avatar, he has been an entrepreneur and also played an active role in building the startup ecosystem in India. Prashant, the stage is yours.
Thank you so much, Marta, for having me over. It's a pleasure to be here and to share my experience and also what we see is happening in the world of online education and how mentorship is transforming it. Yeah, so let's get started. Okay, so we are talking about career transitions in the age of pandemic and the impact that mentorship is driving. So without further ado, let me quickly talk about who am I, right? And what have I been doing over the last 8 years since the time I completed college. What you will see here is three brackets of my life, which is present right now, past, what I've done in the past, obviously, and then what I do on the side, right? So what I'm doing right now, and Marta touched upon that very well, is I'm currently heading growth for an online education company called Springboard. Uh, for those of you who, and most likely you would have never heard of Springboard, we are an online education company. We are based out of or headquartered in San Francisco. And what differentiates us though is we are an education company that has a contrarian approach, so to say, when it comes to education, because we believe the future of education is personal and it has to be personalized and also driven to create outcomes or to build outcomes for learners. So that is what Springboard is. And what I do with Springboard is I had growth for the India business. So we launched the India business 2.5 years back, or 2.5 years back is when I started working on this whole idea of getting Springboard into India. And so like the first 6 months involved working with the management team to figure out what should the strategy be for India, what resources we would need, what users will we go after, what should be the value prop, etc., etc., and then we finally launched. So that is what I am doing currently. The numbers you can very well read on your screen, so I'll not touch upon them. What I would say though is this particular journey of the last 2.5 years has been the most transformational time or the work that I have ever done in my life till now, because it is very rare that you will get an opportunity to operate like an entrepreneur, not necessarily building your own company, but still building someone else's dream. And it is very rare that you would not feel like you're not an entrepreneur, even when you are doing that. And that is what the journey has been for me. Now, when it comes to the past, so for the last several years, and 7 years to be precise, I have done what I could have to build the startup ecosystem of India. So there is an organization called Head Start, which is India's largest platform for grassroots level entrepreneurship. It's a completely volunteer driven organization. And I started out as a volunteer in 2012. Uh, that was the time when the startup ecosystem in India was very, very nascent. All these conversations that you would see happening around India when it comes to startups was not even mainstream at that point of time, right? So I associated myself in 2012 as a volunteer. In a year's time, I became the city lead, which is city in consideration here is Bangalore, which also happens to be the largest ecosystem of India. And through that, I have thankfully been at a place where I was able to help startups and other stakeholders, right, in any which ways I could have. So that is one of the past that I cherish a lot, to be at a place and at a time which was just a sweet spot of the startup revolution, and to have contributed at that time ensured that I always had all the stakeholder support and also the impact that I wanted to generate and create. uh, when it comes to another aspect that you would see here is obviously me being an entrepreneur or a founder. So I've tried my hands at entrepreneurship twice. One that I would like to talk about here though is Short Pitch. Right? So it was a one-touch pitching app for startups to investors. And when we launched it in 2016, 2015 end, it caught imagination of people. Right? And when I say that, we mean that within 6 months, the amount of media coverage we got and the number of people that were talking about that product was incredible. It had an unfortunate end, but yeah, that's one thing that I'm also proud of. In a nutshell, I've tried it twice and now I'm working full time. So I'm not an entrepreneur, so to say, in the classic sense right now. Uh, what keeps me going is the third bracket, which is side projects. So what I always do is because I've always wanted to channelize my entrepreneurial energy. There are things that I would run on the side that helps me keep that energy going. So the two things that I'm actively running right now, one of them is to help talented developers get into top startups without having to go through any kind of a resume shortlisting, etc., the usual job search journey. And the way we do that is through a newsletter. So getting developers hired through a newsletter, the results have been encouraging, which you can see. So we have helped 30 plus developers get hired into startups in like 3 months, and that has been a great story. So the reason I wanted to touch upon that aspect is because although I am in a full-time role right now, but if I don't do side projects, I would feel lesser about myself. So that is about me, right? If you were to think about me as a person of who is Prashant, you're talking to someone who loves or who is into marketing and loves working at the intersection of marketing, products, and people. And that is what my journey has been till today. Okay, so let's talk about online education, right? And we are talking about online education in the times of pandemic. How is it looking like? Now, all of us have heard of the data. All of us have heard and read the news. We have seen that Coursera raised millions of dollars. Every startup who's into education seems to be raising money. But what exactly is happening and what is driving that? Okay, what you will see here is a lot of data. So don't worry about the data. Let me give you a quick summary, right? Now, EdTech, in the latest prediction that was done before the pandemic, was supposed to become a $350 billion industry by 2025. Now, this is before the pandemic. This number has shot up and gone beyond $450 billion, right? Now, that is the kind of impact from a mere $100 billion industry that it was in 2015. It will cross a $450 billion industry in 2025. This kind of a surge for any industry is uncommon, right? And when that happens, companies of large, medium, and small scale will get created all through the world. What we are seeing now is exactly that, right? So we are seeing Coursera reporting that they have had 500% increase of users from the same period last year. There have been numerous unicorns. The world's largest and the most valued or the most valuable education company by Jews comes from India, and it just became most valuable very recently. Even in India, the funding in the entire startup ecosystem has gone down. The funding of education companies compared to last year has increased multiple folds, right? When you hear funding news in India today or even around the world, most likely it is going to be an education company that is getting funded. Now, let's come to, it is very important to know what is driving this, right? So let's come to that. And this context is important because we are talking about education in the times of pandemic and how mentorship is driving that, right? So that's why this is very important to know what is driving this. So, all of us are unfortunately going through a time which is keeping everyone at home, right? That directly means that people are not commuting to their office, right? Which has a direct correlation to the fact that in your previous, like before pandemic, if you always knew that you had a certain skill gap or you wanted to learn something, now when it comes to learning, this can have a direct correlation to your job. It can be learning things that is outside of your job, or it can be something that you just want to learn because you are someone who always wanted to learn. Imagine a scenario. You used to spend 2 hours commuting back and forth from the office, and suddenly you have that time for yourself. What you do with that time, more often than not, you would invest that time to grow yourself. And looks like that is what the world is doing, right? No matter what you read on the internet, it would point to this single fact. People are choosing to invest that extra time in growing themselves. Now, why are they choosing to grow themselves? It is not a recent conversation that the world and the world of technology specifically evolves at a rapid and a very fast rate. People have known that to stay relevant, an average millennial would need to upskill 5 to 7 times, anything between that. To know that and to not do anything is a very uncomfortable situation and a position to be in. And suddenly, when you have time to cover that gap, you will do whatever it takes to cover that gap to stay relevant. And now, because of the pandemic, the world has become even more uncertain. So you don't even suddenly you don't even know what kind of jobs would exist, would not exist, what you need to be skill wise, and what you need to invest in education wise. So probably you will end up learning whatever you feel is important, and that is what is driving this whole craziness and the whole euphoria around education. uh, and numbers speaks for themselves, right? Like if you look at the total number of or the amount of investment that has gone into education, close to $800 million, and this data is till June. If you look at till August, it has crossed $1 billion already. And that's an incredible amount of investment that an education industry is receiving, which was never the darling of VC firms or the venture capital investors. So that is the context about what is happening and why it is happening. Now, let's talk about how exactly the world is learning. Now, most of you listening to this would have been more likely or most likely you would have gone to a school for sure. You've gone to a college or university, right? And what happens in a school or university or a college system is this, right? Now, the idea of education seems to be, till now and till very recently, have been centered around the fact that there'll be one professor or one teacher who feels that that teacher knows every single student sitting in the class, like to a detail, where he or she can teach in a manner such that every learner would actually end up learning and succeeding in life. And what we call this at Springboard, and also the new model of education, is one size fits all. So if there are, let's say, 50 students sitting in a university or a college, a professor comes, teaches something almost with the assumption that everybody would have understood it. And if you're listening to this, you know how painful that experience is, because how you perceive things, what your aspirations are, what your learning styles are, cannot be compared and cannot be matched with any other single person in this world. This also means that the new model of education needs to center around you or the person who wants to learn, right? Now, how does that even work, right? Because the world has never thought about education as a concept, has always been imparting knowledge, or there is a person or a group of people or professors or teachers who are supposed to have the knowledge. They would come and impart and disappear. And what we are realizing and understanding, and the world is opening up to that idea more and more, is that model does not work, because people's aspirations are not met, learning styles are different, their outlook is different, they want to do different things with the knowledge that they get. What do you do, right? And how do you even solve that problem? And this is where the world has started innovating. Now, just to add one more thing here, if you on this point, if you think back and correlate the early online education revolution that the world went through, which was, when Coursera started, or when Udemy started, when Udacity came into the picture, and all of these big online learning platforms that they just tried to replicate this one size fits all model onto the internet, right? Or brought it online. The reason why they failed is exactly why university does not work, because the model remains the same. It is not adapting to people's style. So what do you do then is this, right? uh, education needs to be very, very personal, right? And what I mean by that is you would want to learn with someone whom you want to become like. You would want to learn from someone whom you want to become like because that person understands your background, number one. Number two, that person understands your aspirations. Number three, that person would almost not will always be not your teacher but your guide. So think of, and the example depicts this beautifully. A guide or a mentor does not handhold people. They show you the right path. They solve the problems that you would face in the journey to become successful, right? And because you will work personal and one-on-one, you will craft your learning journey and create your learning journey in a way that you want to learn, not in the way that the world wants you to learn or the university wants you to learn, right? This model of learning or education also means that we are seeing a new revolution where to become a professor, in the conventional sense, you don't need to be a professor at a university. If you are a successful operator, you can change people's lives by coaching them and mentoring them, right? Now, in the parlance of education, what does that mean? What does, like you can coach anyone and make them successful mean? If and there are, imagine, right, there are Airbnbs, Facebook, Pinterest, Twitter, Flipkarts, like successful companies all around the world, and there are operators who have spent years working in these companies. Let's say you want to learn marketing, right? And there is a head of marketing at Facebook. Now that person wants to mentor. If you can give that person an infrastructure to mentor upcoming people who want to learn marketing, it is becoming more and more evident that people would prefer that person over a credential university, right? Because your learning will be actionable, your learning will be applicable to the jobs that you will do, and you will learn from someone that you want to become like, right? And that is what we are seeing in this new world or the new age. Okay. So we spoke about what we were doing earlier, right? And when it comes to the university model and why one size fits all does not work, and why the world is moving to one size fits one. What does this mean, right? Because the university would not disappear. University may come online as we are seeing right now. So we are seeing more and more schools and colleges almost like forced into adopting the model of coming online because of the pandemic. Now, if you have to understand this phenomenon which is happening in the world, what would the future university look like from your perspective, from a learner's perspective, from somebody who wants to transition into a new career? What does that mean? It means that the university of future would be designed to fit your life. It would not ask you, want you, need you to quit your job, to move cities, to give up everything that you were doing in your life and just focus on education. It will be a model which you can learn anytime, anywhere, at your own pace. Second is the new university, which is online and which is already happening in the world, is a learn by doing. It is not focused on it is focused on portfolios and not focused on degrees, right? uh, we are the pace at which the world is moving away from degrees has only become faster because of the pandemic, right? Because when companies now hire, they look for the evidence of the skill set, not the certification of the skill set. And that is what we mean by project based and learn by doing. That is what the university of the future would start doing and is already doing. Personalized, we spoke about this quite a bit, I shared the fact that if you look at even yourself, how you perceive a certain concept, how you understand that concept, and how your friend understands that concept has a difference, right? And that is why you need to learn with someone who would make you understand each and every concept in a way that you understand. And that is what personalization of education and adapting to each and everyone's learning styles mean. So the university of the future would always take care of personalization. Four is human support and accountability. And this is a very important point, right? Like the first phase of online education revolution almost thought of, and I said that earlier also, almost said that we will take the university infrastructure, put it online, and that would be known as online education. What the world has realized is content was never actually education, right? Content is a means to learn. It is not education. Because when you're looking to transition or build a new career, you need all kinds of human support and accountability at every instance that your motivation would drop. Now, why is this important, right? Because content, as I said, is a means. When you're learning something new, you would need to be inspired, you would need to be motivated, you would need to be pushed through. When you're feeling down, you need to be brought up. All of this can be done by different sets of human. So there can be a mentor that you can have, there can be a coach, there can be other support system, right? You would have heard this concept of, let's say, community. This is called putting actual humans to ensure that you don't feel lonely. Because when online education tried replicating and bringing everything in the first phase online, then they just put content online with nothing in between. And that is why you would have, most probably you would have heard of these stories wherein certain platforms have very low completion rates. Why? Because nobody wants to read content, right? They want to interact, they want to understand what others are doing, what progress they are making, what projects they are working on, etc., etc., right? And online education should not look and feel very different from how a university looks and feels like. So that is what human support and accountability is. And finally, and most important, specifically online education will not work and will only work in the future if it has direct correlation to your outcome. People, specifically professionals, take to learning when they have a fixed outcome in their mind. Now that outcome more or less happens to be a new job, a new career, or a transition. If your education does not help you meet your goal, that education is more or less worthless, right? And that is why the university of the future has to be directly accountable to get you to that outcome. If it can't, then that education was not worth it in the first place. Now, all these five things put together is what I believe, and also at Springboard we believe, is the future university and how it will look like. And also, this is the future of online learning and the future of education. Uh, Now, what is happening if you have followed the world of education and how things are evolving? This is exactly where more and more work is happening. Even in the US, there are players, let's say Thinkful or others, who are investing resources and money to build these 5 levers. Because you cannot just survive in this market, or you cannot help meet people's aspiration by providing them content alone. Yeah. Okay. So let me tell you and share a story about mentorship, because that is what we spoke about in the beginning, and how that is transforming careers and the power it has. So, several months back, there was this learner working at one of the biggest IT companies of India. And she was working in that organization for close to a year and a half. And this is very common in a place like India, wherein if you have worked at a large IT firm, you more time you will spend at that firm, you will start losing sight of where and how to build your career, right? If you continue in that same organization doing the same things day after day. And she was going through the same cycle. uh, the good thing there though is she knew that she had some interest in the field of AI and machine learning. The other added advantage that she had was she had a genuine interest in coding, and she had done coding or programming in her life. This is the context or the background that this particular professional or the learner is coming from. Right? Now, what she didn't want was she didn't want to quit her job. Right? So she didn't want to go to a university for 2 years for, let's say, a master's in AI, spend some $100,000 to get that master's, and even after spending that money, not knowing whether she'll actually get a job because visa regulations, this, that, like relationships between two countries these days evolve and change at a very fast rate. So she was just not open to the idea of spending so much money, investing time, quitting her job, and then going into a uncharted territory just to move and shift her career into machine learning and artificial intelligence. Her goal was very clear, right? So what I am doing in this IT company right now, I don't necessarily enjoy, and I want to move to a new age technology, which is machine learning, and work in that industry. Perfect. But the restriction was all of these that we spoke about. What did she do? She obviously discovered Spring Boot. I may not recall how, but she inquired with us and started understanding what we do and how we operate and how we work. And she got started with learning. Now, on the other hand, there was this another person who has never been a professor in his life or a teacher or anything, right? He has just been someone who has spent enough time, 8 years to be precise, working as a machine learning engineer or slash AI engineer in some of the top startups and companies in India itself. Right? And he was someone whom we have onboarded as a mentor. Right? Now, when this girl came on board, we matched her with this particular person. Now, imagine the scenario. The mentor has never taught in the classical sense, right? The learner has a big goal. If not met, she will be dissatisfied for a long, long time in her life. Right? They start working together for 9 months. Every single week, they do a video call around the topics that she is learning, what help she needs. The mentor ended up obviously talking about his experience and how to ensure you do the right projects, how to ensure that you are able to portray yourself in the right manners during the interview. Basically, in that 9 months, every week over a video call, the mentor worked on each and every aspect that he knew can get a person over the line when it comes to actually transitioning into a new career. And when you think about that, it means, did you learn the right things in the right way? Did you do the right projects so that it can catch the attention of the hiring managers? Did you project yourself in the right way so that you can get to the interviews? Then did you finally crack those interviews? 9 months after that, she cracked the interview. She got into a job. Now she works as a machine learning engineer at a California, San Francisco based headquartered company, but she now works out of her home. And that is the power that we are talking about, right? Like there are people and operators sitting all over the world working in companies like, Twitter, Airbnb, Flipkart, etc., etc., who now have the power to help people jump into new careers just because of their experience. They don't need to be teachers. They don't need to be professors. People don't need to spend humongous amount of money to build new careers. And with that, what I would ask and leave you with is, what model of learning will you choose to build your career or to transition into a new career when you want to? Thank you.
I do have a few questions that I think the listeners would be very interested in listening into as well. You talked about the customization of education, especially online education, and not having one size fits all, which I agree is pretty much a 19th century concept, and it's about time we moved on from that. But one for one, really something that will be a good fit for every one of the learners out there. Is there space for other models as well to be implemented in the online educational scene?
So, just an extension of this model, right? Like we spoke about the university model wherein, or the college model where there is like one teacher or one professor and there's like hundreds of students. That model for sure does not work. And we have realized that. If not one-on-one, there is something called 1:5 or 1:10, right? Now it's an extension of how small can you keep the group so that personalization would still work and it is possible to scale the model. Now keep in mind that one-on-one may not always be possible to scale, and that's why even when the world is moving towards personalization, it might do in 1:many or 1:x. The value of that x will be lesser so that it is still personalized. When it comes to other interactions, right? And I spoke about human support and accountability, right? And this is where there's a lot of work and experimentation going on with respect to what may or may not work. If you think about education and how you learn, or how most of us have learned, a lot of our learnings have come from interactions, right? A lot of our learning have come from, like by talking to different people, or the similar people who are doing the similar things or the same things. And that is where another model which is working quite well and which is being experimented a lot on is a community learning, right? Wherein how can you keep the same people who are learning the same things together so that they learn better, right? Because it is easier to do that when it comes to, if you are in a college or university, hard to do it when you are online, right? And how you crack it is an open problem. To be very honest, I have not seen anyone who has cracked the community model of education. One-on-one is still a very technology problem. You can solve it through technology. Community you can also solve through technology, but it feels like an ocean. What you don't even know how to operate, how to behave, right? So I would say that there is an open space around community learning, which nobody has really figured out how to crack it.
It is a pretty much a blue ocean at the end of the day, because like I mentioned, the system hasn't really changed up until now. We've been going with the same system since the 19th century, and only recent years, and I would say especially this year, has kind of pushed us to explore the unknown. Well, like you said, future is here, and we have to get used to the rest of our lives, I suppose. Thank you so much, Prashant. I think we'll wrap up here. It was really, I mean, I even took, I don't know if you can see it, but I took little notes for myself from your presentation.
Oh, thank
So
you so much.
it was really insightful and gave me a lot of food for thought when it comes to my own personal development, as well as what to do with my community. So thank you very much for the insights. They've been really helpful. Our next speaker, Ayush Jeswal, is the founder and CEO of Pesto Tech, that helps top-tier companies hire top-grade remote engineers from India. Pesto Tech is a technology education company that trains, upskills, and enables India's top software engineering talent for fast-paced growth and break into the international tech careers via full-time remote jobs. Pesto is on a mission to give everyone equal access to opportunity regardless of their background. Today, it is focusing on upskilling India's 5 million software engineers and pairing them with the world's top tech companies. Ayush, the stage is yours.
Thanks for the intro, Marta. I think that I felt good about myself for a little bit there. That we saw the future ahead of time. But yeah, I would love to share some thoughts on how the world has changed, and also give perspective around how remote work as an industry evolved. Because a lot of people think that remote work is fairly new, but the fact is that remote work has actually been around for the last 10 years or so, right? And I believe that the way it has evolved, it's quite beautiful, right? So I think during the talk, I'll talk about sort of a few focus points, right? That how remote work is changing, how remote jobs are changing, and how remote education is evolving, right? So I think I'll keep these three broad points, which I'll hit back all the time, and also share some perspective. So to start with, I think I'll refer to the time when I got excited about remote work, right? Like I remember in 2017 when I visited US. I was trying to figure out something to do. I was in the early stages of my career, and I came across a company called GitLab, um, a company which had no offices. So now it's the norm. I don't think anyone has offices today, but at that time it was crazy. Um, I realized that GitLab, Zapier, and a bunch of other startups were doing some phenomenal job with respect to building their team fully remote with people all across the world. And that really fascinated me, right? So I think in the pre-pandemic world, before coronavirus really gave us a hard time, um, we were looking at remote work trend really picking up quickly, right? And we were estimating that towards the end of 2020 and the first couple of quarters of 2021, more and more small to mid-size startups will start being the early adopters, right? And we were guessing that the top talent would want to go remote. So we were thinking that the whole transition from a normal world to a remote universe will look like something which will have a transition period of about 3 to 4 years, right? And I think what the pandemic did to that is that it just shrinked that 3 to 5 years timeline to 3 to 5 months, and everybody had to adjust and change their behaviors in a matter of months, right? So I think that happened, and ever since the pandemic, we don't feel that work will be the same ever again. We feel the world is not changing. The world has already changed, and there is no going back. And the reason I say this is because I personally started being fascinated about remote work because I believe that remote work just had way too many advantages, and the only barrier was stereotypes. People thinking that that there's a usual way of doing work, like usual way people go to offices, work from 9 to 5, so on and so forth. Breaking those stereotypes was the hardest thing which we faced in our pestos journey in the first couple of years, right? But once that happened, I run a newsletter and I talk to a lot of entrepreneurs on a weekly basis. I have barely had anyone who came to me and said that the productivity of their team has gone down because of working from home, right? And I'm of course specifically talking about people in tech, people who can do their jobs, while being at home, and not, which jobs which requires physical presence. So we feel that now that the stereotypes were forcefully, in a brute force manner broken, and people tried a bunch of things and that worked, I feel as we get back to the world, and as the pandemic situation sort of goes away with time, we feel that the companies are going to stick to working remote. And I think as that happens, there is a fundamental thing which we are also chasing, is that there is disparity of opportunities across the world, right? Like we always say that talent is universal, but opportunity is not. There is such scarcity of developers in US, and there is abundance of developers in India and Europe. Earlier, these people had to migrate to those places, right? All of us had to move to cities in search of opportunities. That kept us away from our families. That disturbed our work-life balance. That made us travel a couple of hours in traffic every day. That really degraded the quality of life over time. And I feel that people are realizing that once people go remote, all of those advantages can be taken care of, and there are just too many good things when it comes to working remotely, for the world to get back to the old ways. So I think that is something which excites us the most, and that is something which we have a lot of clarity on, and we're moving towards that direction where we sort of address those challenges. The second thing which I would love to talk about is how are people adopting to this change. Right now, we know that this is something which is the future, and it cannot be really, there are very few people who would bet against it. But as we are moving remote, now we have to see how we are going to adopt, how we are going to solve the challenges which comes to remote work, right? Aspects like there are certain social challenges when you're in a company and you're visiting, the conversations you have over lunch with people you don't directly work with, that really makes the whole experience of working beautiful, right? So I'll touch upon a couple of points. First is remote collaboration. And the second one I'll talk about is how do you actually build a culture in a remote environment, right? How do you really make people build meaningful relationships while working remotely, right? So first of all, I think I'll talk about collaboration, right? I think when it comes to collaboration, remote work is something which has only become possible or has become sustainable in last few years. And what has changed is technology. Earlier, 5 years ago, we did not have technology to support the remote nature of work. But we had certain early adopters, certain companies like Doist, like Basecamp, Loom. One of the tools which I'm using, which is great, right? The pandemic happened, and Zoom backgrounds became a thing, right? We are using a Zoom background and flashing our logos. And this company basically said that we can now make use of those backgrounds and actually make the meeting more productive, right? So I can do all sorts of things to communicate with my background. I can, shrink up. I can come back, become bigger when I don't want people to look at my background. I can decrease my opacity when I want to flash your logo. I can become a Yoda, like, and move around with it. So I think these are all fun tools. These are all innovations which has happened in just last few months. And I feel that there is so much more innovation which is going to happen around collaboration, which is going to solve the communication aspect of remote working, which impacts your productivity, right? So I think the productivity part is something which we are very confident that it has been taken care of. And there are very few people who will doubt that, that can be a challenge. The second aspect, which is how do you build that culture in the company, right? Now that is super interesting for us as well. At Pesto, we moved remote last year. We always have had a few people who have been working remote with us since the inception. We have always realized that there are things in a remote environment which you have to do consciously, which earlier happened subconsciously, right? If you went to your office, you would talk to your colleague almost, without realizing, like while having your lunch or while, sort of drinking water at the water cooler, right? Just saying simple things like, hey, how are you doing? How's your vacation, right? Things like that, catching up with them, getting to know about their lives, going out for dinner and things like that happen. But now, when you send somebody a Slack message that, hey, I would love to do a coffee meeting with you, or catch up for a game, right? It sounds weird, right? Because you need to schedule it. So we realized that the only difference when it comes to a remote environment or a non-remote environment with respect to building culture was that we had to do things consciously rather than relying on relationships getting built by people being in the same room, right? So the definition of same room has changed, right? Some of the things which we do at Pesto is that we hold no agenda meetings, right? We catch up once a month, every Friday, in which we are going to play poker, right? All of us, or play some card game, or play some, board games, right? And everybody's, people are having beer, coffee, whatever, and just trying to spend some time with each other, right? So I think doing things like those really helped us to get people together and bring that feeling of togetherness, right? And that has really helped us build that culture, and in the social aspect, I would say, of the company, which has really made work fun for us. Now, the second point which I would also want to mention here is that right now, what we are doing, we are comparing that with remote work. You know, I would like to believe that this is not what remote work looks like. We have been working remote before the pandemic, and I'm very, very certain that there is one way of work, which is the old way of work. Then there is remote work, in which you work remotely from a different office or a coffee shop, wherever you want, but you work not in the same office, right? You can work at a co-working space, so on and so forth, right? All employees in different co-working spaces. The third way of work is work from home. You have a home office. You try to build discipline in the house, in which you teach yourself how you're going to differentiate between your work-life balance, and manage that, right? That is the third way of working. That is work from home. The fourth way of working, which people often don't talk about, is work from pandemic. So what we are doing right now is not remote work. It's not work from home. It's actually work from pandemic. And the reason I say this is because remote work was pretty awesome, right? Like you would have your setup, you could order books, you could do things, you could go out to play, you could go out for partying, you could meet your friends, so on and so forth. You could also, while working remotely, host offsites in which you bring people together. Like before the pandemic happened, we actually planned to do offsites almost every quarter, in which we would bring all our employees together in one place and brainstorm and have fun, right? But none of that we can do today. So I think people really need to understand that what we are doing today has a lot of positives, but it also has a lot of negatives. But those negatives are not necessarily targeted at remote work. That they are also related to this work from pandemic situation, which will go away with time, right? So I think it's pretty fascinating. I'm super curious about how the world will adopt it, but the trend which I'm seeing is that more and more companies are now open to working remote, and the access to talent which they get while doing that is pretty phenomenal. And that brings me to the next agenda items, which is remote jobs, right? Like how is the jobs market going to evolve? How are people going to take it? How's the market going to evolve, so on and so forth, right? And I think a couple of really good things I would talk about when it comes to remote jobs is that I feel as jobs go remote, globalization of opportunities is going to happen, and those opportunities will become a lot more democratic in nature. Earlier, people in Europe did not have access to opportunities which are in Latin America, let's say, right, or North America. But now they do. Now people in Europe can work with companies in Asia, right? That's great, and that is great for the company because they now have the world's talent at their disposal, right? And they can pick and choose, and they can sort of hire them and work accordingly. However, it has its own challenges, right? Challenges like your ability to stand out. Earlier, if a company posted a job post in Nevada, right, then people in Nevada would apply there, right? If you post a job in Los Angeles, people in Los Angeles would apply with the matching profiles. But today, if you post a job, probably people all across the world are going to apply, and filtering those applications is going to become very costly for companies. Interviewing is going to be a big burden which will come up as the number of applications goes up. So that's the negative side of things, right? For people who are looking for jobs, it's very, very important for them to find a way to differentiate themselves. We feel that the whole recruitment industry is going to have to change and evolve. We had seen previously that recruitment industries, KPIs used to be around how many profiles, matching profiles you send, which means filling up the top of the funnel more, right? But now it's the whole game is going to reverse. Now people might need the recruitment agencies to not send more profiles, but to filter out the profiles which they have already received, because the problem is different now. The problem is not the lack of profiles, the problem is interviewing, right? And I feel that there are a lot of companies which will show up in that market, that gap, that niche which is there right now, will become much larger as the market expands, as the remote work industry expands, right? And I think that is going to fundamentally cause a couple of really, really big changes with respect to the whole industry, right? And I think that is something which we are sort of looking forward to as well. So that is how I believe the jobs market is going to evolve. It's going to become just a hell lot more competitive, and at the same time, people will get access to opportunities which they did not have before. So I think I'm really curious to see how that goes up. Uh, I know we are short on time. I'm just going to do a quick one on remote education before I open it up for questions. I thought there is some Q&A sort of session as well, which I would love to address. The last point, which is around remote education, right? I think Pesto was a company which was earlier doing education in a non-remote format. We used to get our students in our campus and we used to train them in person, right? Our evolution also happened late last year, right? I think we launched our new program in January or February, since when we went fully remote with respect to education, right? Now, we realized that the signals of this we had already seen over the last 5 years, right? We had seen rise of some great companies, the likes of Coursera, Udemy, so on and so forth, and multiple other companies in different skill sectors, which came up with the advantage of spreading that education, via some experts. We had seen Masterclass and a bunch of other companies who did a great job with that. We feel that people are now being able to measure the progress. I think measuring the progress is something which fundamentally I believe is changing the game. Earlier, I'll give you an example that and I'll specifically talk about remote education, right? Sorry, tech education and nothing else, because that's my expertise. I believe that tech education in general is quite new. It's only 20 years old. And as tech education came in, we tried to fit it into an older concept of education, which we knew, which is 400 years old. The whole concept of going to a building, studying for 4 years or 5 years, X amount of time, and thinking that the knowledge which you accumulate in that amount of time period will be relevant throughout your life. We feel that that whole concept is a little broken when it comes to tech, for one simple reason, that tech changes almost every couple of years. Whatever you learn today will not be relevant 5 years from now. And for that one reason, the older concept doesn't work. And if we think about it, degrees were just a way to validate that you have X amount of skill sets, right? Because internet came in last 20, 25 years, right? Before that, there was no way for anyone to validate what are the things which you know. So that's why people use degrees, right? In last decade or so, we have seen the transition happening from degrees to some other ways in which you can measure the skill set. For a designer, your work can easily be seen on Instagram, on Flickr, Dribble, or multiple other platforms, which people can, have a look at and judge your skill set. For a programmer, I would love to look at the code which you have written instead of the college where you studied from, right? And I think the ability to measure those skill sets is exponentially increasing in different fields when it comes to tech. And I think for that one simple reason, over the next 2 to 5 years, we are going to see a massive transition happening in mindset when companies are going to transition from hiring people from the traditional, education background, so on and so forth, to finding more and better ways in which they can exactly measure the skill sets of these people, who are coming in. And as that happens, I believe the focus on continuous education is going to be the key. A lot of people are going to start focusing on continuous education, and build that into their habit. And education will no longer be a limited time period thing. It'll more be like, a part of your lifestyle. So I think people will have to continuously learn in order to stay relevant in the market. And again, as I said, this is very specific to tech because my domain knowledge is limited. But this is what we have seen, that is going to happen. And for this one simple reason, fundamentally, if you have to learn constantly, being in any physical location constantly is just not a possibility. So by design, remote education has to be adopted by people over the next few years, as they fight to stay relevant in the market.
I've already asked this question to another speaker, but I will also ask you a very general and a very philosophical question that you kind of may have addressed already in your presentation, but kind of to summarize, what do you think will be the future of work? And not only technology work, developer work, but work in general. How will we be defining work in the next years, decades?
I think most of the skill sets or job positions which we see today, um, will probably be irrelevant in next few decades, right? And because you mentioned decades, um, I believe that slowly automation is going to take over majority of the jobs, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, right? It's just that we as human beings have to do a certain amount of work to take care of our necessities. And if that gets automated, you just have better quality of life, right? You will need a new system. But I feel that the skill sets which we see, which has relevance today, will not have relevance, necessarily of a few years from now as well, right? So that is with respect to skill sets. The other thing, which is quite important, is that future of work does not belong to people coming together, like in an office environment, to sort of feel that they belong to the same company, right? I'm just trying to figure out how do I put it. So companies are not going to pull people together to the same building to give them that sense of belongingness. Instead of companies doing that, that sense of belongingness has to be somewhere, right? I believe communities is something which will do that instead, right? Like, so I think, I feel that communities is going to be the next real estate, and that is going to be extremely valuable as we move along. So yeah, just sharing some random thoughts there.
Well, not so random, I think, because it's literally something that I think as well, that the communities are the future, and that communities will be defining the way we work, the way we function. So yeah, I guess great minds think alike. I do have a bit of a personal question for you, in the sense that you mentioned about, well, we were talking about remote work, obviously, but what prepares for remote work is remote education, one would think. And do you have experience in that? Like, what did you do to be prepared for what you're doing right now? And what lessons can you advise for others?
Gotcha. I think you know, as we are all going through this situation, there is no sort of a go-to secret which is going to solve everybody's problems, because I feel different companies are different. Like, you know, a culture of a company is the people in it, right? That's what I believe, that people form the culture, and you try to bring people with similar mindsets together, and try to, you know, support them. um, I feel that similarly, you know, just like culture was in a sort of non-remote environment, I believe the same is going to happen when it comes to remote work. We are going to see uh, a lot of, you know, companies come up with different solutions, but we will have a very simple common stack to solve all the common problems which we all face. For example, um, collaboration across different time zones, right? Now, things like that are going to be solved, right? I would say that things like that are already solved. Um, and I think what we have seen is that asynchronous communication has been extremely productive for different companies, right? Where people can work at their own pace, and they can be productive while doing that. And you know, different people from different parts of the world sort of can you know, hop along. And if we think about it in retrospect, we will realize that India, for example, is the outsourcing hub of the world, and only the top 4 consulting companies employ more than 1 million people. All of those millions of people have been working remote for the last 4 to 5 decades, and nobody noticed it earlier because it wasn't as fancy, right? Now, they've been working from offices in India, I get that, but in a sense that they've been working remote while they collaborate with companies in US. So I think some of the things which are the most common things which I would highly recommend people solving for is that over communication has to be practiced across different teams. Without that, remote work is just impossible. Um, Taking conscious efforts to build the relationships within the company, and organizing things which brings the social aspects of the team you know, in the game is extremely important. And it could be as simple as using Snapchat filters, or you know, to just have fun and sort of like, you know, do silly things on Zoom call. But I think that social aspect is extremely important, because you know, working at a company should feel like you're working towards a mission together with others, right? So I think that is the second most important thing. And the third most important thing I feel is documentation, right? If you document everything really well, that really sort of, you know, decreases the work for your teammates and helps them be on the same page, right? I feel if we just practice these 3 things right, and of course you need to have your culture code straight, in which, you know, you practice the usual, you know, trying to optimize for high performance and accountability and things like that. I think these 3 things are the biggest ones for me when it comes to, you know, moving towards a remote environment.
Well, that's like, exactly the things that we needed to hear, I guess. And that kind of covers my one of the questions that I also had was about the 3 tips that you would give to employers for remote work. But maybe there's something you want to add, a tip or two for employers, for companies, if they want to have a successful remote team?
Oh, 100%. I think, apart from these three things, I would say that it's extremely important to protect the togetherness, especially during pandemic for all employers, because it's very easy for employees to get isolated and start feeling lonely. We have seen that pattern in the past, and that was one of the biggest challenges with remote work. That happened. So I think mental health is something which we sort of expect will be a challenge with respect to remote work, and employers should do something about it. Just taking small steps to checking in on them, or we are introducing something called sort of a recharge holidays at Presto. We're about to announce it to our team as well, in which we're just asking people to take a few days off every month to sort of relax, because we realize that in a remote environment, because everything is scheduled, you actually end up working a lot, and the tendency to burn yourself out for especially people who are hardworking folks is quite high. So I think mental health and taking care of these aspects is extremely important for employers. They'll have to make conscious efforts because these problems won't be visible to them, right?
I totally agree. I have just one last question to ask you, and that is, I know I've seen before we started this recording that you're very savvy with various online tools, and at the same time, Korean market, although very digital and you would say tech savvy, is not very onto remote work yet. So what are the 3 tools that you would recommend to Korean employers and employees to get accustomed to remote work and jump on the bandwagon and just enjoy the show?
Oh my God, it's very hard for me to come down to 3 actually. But
I will make it slightly easier. That a lot of English is not the most comfortable language in Korea, so something that can address that as well, maybe.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's an interesting one. I actually haven't come across a lot of language translation products. I actually browse products on Product Hunt a lot, and
Yeah.
I think that gives me a lot of sort of exposure to what's happening new in tech. But I think I'll quickly mention a few tools which are quite phenomenal when it comes to remote work in general. I feel for documentation, having a wiki for every company whenever you work remote is extremely important. And for documentation, Notion.so has become one of the most popular tools in recent times, and we use it for our own internal wiki as well, and that is pretty phenomenal for us. The second one which I would recommend is a collaboration tool in which people can come together and sort of communicate or over communicate rather in a much more effective way, right? Slack or Microsoft Teams are a great example of that. We've seen the popularity of Microsoft Teams in recent times, but we have been using Slack for a while now, and that has really added a lot of value for being remote. The third tool I would recommend is actually one of my favorite ones. There is a tool. So the whole feeling of people being together or people being with you while you work is extremely important. And I realized that it is actually not the physical presence which gives you that feeling. Even when people are there on my screen, I feel the same, that they're here. I can just hit a button and talk to them without having to request them for a call or without having to schedule it or things like that. And the tool which I'm talking about, a couple of tools who solve the same problem. One is called a Remotion, and the other one is called Tandem, Tandem, right? Both of these tools are pretty phenomenal. Whatever number of people you have in your office, it creates different rooms in which you can jump in and out of, pretty quickly, and you can hit people up. There's a small circle which starts a call quickly on the spot, and you feel like you are with them. And I feel that psychologically added a lot of value for us. I see Anurag recommended one tool as well, Flitto. I'm unaware of what it exactly does, but I think it must be something related to collaboration over different languages.
I would like to thank our speakers for sharing very interesting and profound insights and their experiences connected to remote technology and digitalization. I do hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Please stay tuned for next month's webinar where we will be talking about AI technology and how it's been changing Korea's ecosystem. In the meantime, please stay safe and sound. Thank you and see you soon.